We often rely on compression when mastering to achieve three main things. 1. To glue our sounds together. 2. To control the dynamics of our signal. And 3. To create headroom so we have more room to turn up our tracks later. Mastering compression ultimately helps bridge the gap between the loudest and quietest parts of your mix, bringing them closer together and making them sound more consistent, especially on smaller listening devices which can't reproduce the same frequencies as big ones. However, compression comes with its faults. Sometimes it overreacts to material because it looks at your entire signal in the mastering process, and therefore it might react more aggressively to some frequency pockets over others. In other words, some specific sounds in your mix may trigger the compression and therefore cause everything to get reduced at the same time, and that may not necessarily sound as good. For example, that boomy kick drum in your mix may cause your compressor to trigger and react and compress everything, including high-end sounds that may not necessarily be a problem. Multiband compression is ultimately a better solution because it provides more flexibility and it will lead to a more transparent master as opposed to regular downward compression. This is because multiband compression allows you to compress each individual frequency pocket that you choose uniquely. So I can go in and compress the low end differently from how I compress the high or mid frequencies, and that'll lead to a much more natural sounding master that may not necessarily be triggered by that boomy kick drum that I mentioned. Now I'm going to show you exactly how to use a multiband compressor on your master, but before we do that, let's overview some principles that I like to follow when doing this myself. Number 1, we're going to divide our master into multiple frequency bands, and I'm going to specifically be using at least 4 in this video, but that doesn't mean that you need to use 4. You may only need to use 2 or 3, or maybe you need to use more. You need to use 6. The 4 bands that I'm going to focus on are the sub frequencies, which is 200 hertz and below, the low mid frequencies, which is going to be 200 to 1000 hertz, the high mid frequencies, which is going to be 1000 to 10,000 hertz, and then the high end, which is going to be 10,000 and above. Number 2, because this is a master, we need to understand that we're going to be affecting the entire mix. However, because it's a multi-band compressor that we're using, we're going to really be able to focus on specific pockets which are going to be dominated by some sounds more so than others. So for example, the sub frequencies are probably going to be dominated by the kick and the bass, and the high end might be more dominated by the vocals, the claps, the snares, things of that nature. Now because of this, we need to ensure that we follow number 3, which is we're going to compress each band uniquely and transparently. To do that, we can focus on using the following parameters to start. First, we're going to have a low range, no more than -3 dB. This is the maximum amount of volume that each band will be able to lose if we were to set it up in the most extreme way. Next, we want to have a slow attack. This is going to help preserve the transients of our mix because the compressor is not going to react right away. It's going to be slightly delayed, and that'll help maintain the dynamics and maintain the movement or the impact of our mix while still allowing us to have the benefit of getting some compression, some gain reduction in the process. After that, we're going to have a medium fast release. We don't want to create any artifacts or distortion by having too quick of a release time, but at the same time, we definitely want to have a medium fast release so therefore the compression doesn't stay and linger. It doesn't keep our sound suppressed. It lets go of it fairly quickly and come back to a dynamic state, which will again make sure that this sounds more transparent and make sure that it still moves and breathes and has that impact that we want in the final master. And finally, we're aiming for no more than 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction per band. This is a light and transparent amount of gain reduction. It's not going to be super noticeable, but it should help us create some additional headroom and glue our sounds together in the process. And number 4, we're going to add makeup gain accordingly. And the plan here is we're going to add just enough makeup gain to compensate for what we are losing. We don't want to overdo it. In fact, we want to try to match the gain that we are losing, so that way this sounds fairly neutral and natural. So now that we've overviewed how to think about this whole process and some of the principles that we're going to follow along the way, let's actually get on to Pro Tools and I'll show you how we're going to do this step by step. First things first, I generally like to put my multi-band compressor second in the chain, or at least second in the chain, after some MSEQ. And that's what I'm doing here in this situation. I have the F6 from Waves, and I'm doing just some very light filtering. I'm filtering out some side information on the low end. I'm giving the sides a little nudge, little boost, and then I'm doing a nice high cut on both bands just to make sure that we're basically sculpting our sound. This EQ is really just preparing us for what we're about to do with compression, making some light adjustments in the stereo field, and really just helping us control everything a little bit better ahead of what's to come next. Now, the multi-band compressor I'm going to use in today's video is the Wave C6. I've already set this up to mirror the parameters that we discussed earlier with a -3 range, a slow attack, a faster release, release. Everything is bypassed, and we're going to take these one at a time because that's how you're going to want to set this up yourself. But I'm going to start by using the low band first. I want to set the low band, so I'm going to unbypass it. I'll keep everything else bypassed for the time being. But the low band is where you're really going to find a lot of the kick and sub bass information, right? In fact, I'll solo this so we can just hear exactly what's being affected by this band. Okay, you can already hear there's some low vocal, of course, but it's really predominantly the kick in this case. And there is this booming 808 that comes in. That'll also be a part of this band when it happens. Now, the kick and the bass are big dynamic sounds, okay? These are the things that usually trigger your compressors to work really aggressively, depending on how you set your levels. So it makes sense to go in and treat this uniquely. I'm going to now play this and just bring the threshold down. And you see here, this is -6. We're going to try to get about 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction on this band. So let's do that. Here we go. So you can see we're consistently getting at least 1 dB, but then on those excessive hits, those kick hits, it's coming down even more. It's going down to -2. And of course, the purple bar is indicating the maximum, which is -3. So now that we're getting the amount of gain reduction that we want, we can go in and reevaluate the attack and release. Now, you're typically going to do this in a few scenarios. One, you aren't able to get the amount of gain reduction that you want. That requires that you're going to probably need to speed up your attack. Two, you notice your transients are being flattened too aggressively, and that's going to require that you probably do the opposite. You slow down the attack. Three, you notice you're getting a pumping sound for your track, and that's going to require that you probably slow down the release. And four, you notice an audible distortion or some sort of artifact, and that's also going to require that you slow down your release, but also probably slow down your attack as well. Now, in this case, I feel like we're getting a little bit of pumping here, so I'm going to continue to play this, but then slow down my release to help minimize that pumping from happening. Here we go. And now we're also hearing a little bit more of that 808, and you could tell that we're actually getting a more aggressive reaction. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to now go to that section in particular, play that again, and now ease off on the threshold a little bit, okay? Because obviously we set this when the 808 wasn't playing. That's okay, but now the 808's coming in, you're hearing we're getting a much more aggressive reaction, and that's going to require that we just change the setting a little bit. So that seems to be a little bit better. I've lightened up on the threshold here, and now we're not having as aggressive of a reaction, and I think it just sounds smoother because we've also slowed down the release, which is helping minimize that pumping sound that I was talking about. So keep in mind, it's not a bad thing to change your threshold over time as you set this up, especially when you're changing certain parameters. As you change your attack and release, you're going to start to notice that the reaction is a little bit different. That actually might require that you now readjust your threshold to change the reaction. For example, if you speed up your attack, you might need to back off on the threshold because now your compressor is going to react a bit more aggressively to that material because the attack is telling it to do so. With a slower attack, it may not have that same reaction, but of course, each of these parameters is interlinked and will change the relationship between the compressor and the material, so don't be afraid to adjust things as you go. So now that we have the appropriate amount of gain reduction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this again and just add a little bit of gain to compensate for what we are losing. I'm going to decide to do this on the band directly in this situation. And the key here is I want to do this in a way where I don't necessarily completely change the level. I don't want this to be way louder or way quieter. I want this to be roughly matched so that way there's no volume bias whatsoever. So I'm going to do this to taste with my ears. So I think about 1 dB is going to be okay in this scenario, okay? We're losing 1 dB consistently. However, of course, we're going beyond 1 dB as well. We're losing upwards of 2 dB at times, I would say, especially when there's those significant transient hits of the kick and the bass, the 808, right? I'm going to suggest to you that you try to match the average amount of volume lost and not necessarily the maximum, okay? Just because I'm hitting -2 doesn't mean I should add 2 dB back to compensate for it because that would still be too much since on average we're not losing losing 2. We're losing 1 a bit more consistently. And as you see, when I'm playing this, I'm bypassing and I'm listening and I'm trying to make sure that it feels roughly the same. We could, of course, even do some more intricate ways of checking. So for example, I could go here to my mastering chain. I could go to my peak volume. I could bypass this band for a second. I could play it. We could see what peak volume we're hitting. So that's about minus 7.1, let's say. Now, if I put it in, let's see if we're roughly hitting that same level. So you see, I'm actually about 0.1 away from where I was. So I can actually go in here now and add 1.1 instead. And that should now put us right at that same level that we saw before we even added the compressor. And now we know that it's gain matched. And now we have no bias of volume. We're just able to get this band to compress everything, manage that volume, maintain that volume, but then compensate for just what we were losing. So it's almost the exact same, if not the exact same, as before we did this in the first place. So let's now move on to the next band. And we're going to follow the same exact process, but I'm going to start doing these a little bit quicker because I'm sure you get the idea. But let's see, first of all, what frequencies we're affecting with this band here.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't got to lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't got it.
So definitely like a lot of the vocal, right? Getting a lot of the vocal, getting some of the snare and some of the lower mid-frequency stuff, some instrument sounds, some hi-hat sounds, because some of the hats are pitched low. But of course, this is what we're going to be ultimately compressing and reducing. Now, I have my parameters set up the same, right? Exactly the same as previously. So let's now just dial in our threshold and again, try to get that 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction action.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't got to lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't got to mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut. You get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect. Trying to tell me who I am, what a dialect. If you're gonna get me upset, let's end this now. Let me just bet.
Denial doesn't look good on you. Pride's puffed chest.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut. You get that?
So that seems to be pretty good. We seem to be getting about at least 1 dB more consistently, but then of course it is going up and tickling 2 dB. We're reducing it by 2 dB at times. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably do the same as before. I'm going to slow down my release a little bit because I do feel like I'm getting a little bit of pumping here on this track and I want to just smooth that out, make it feel a little bit more natural. Let's do that.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut. You get that?
Okay, cool. Sounds good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same trick that I just did, okay? So I'm going to bypass my band. I'm going to reset my peak volume. Let's see the peak level for this clip.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love.
So about 11.4. Now if I put this band in, let's see what level we're at.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut. You get that?
So 12.6. So we're about 1.2 dB away. So I can add 1.2 back, and now we should roughly be at the same level.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut. You get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect.
All right, so you're already starting to see how it feels a little bit fuller. So now we've matched the volume here. We can move on to our next band. Okay, now this is going to be definitely more high frequencies, and it's going to be a lot more of the vocal for sure. However, it might also include things like the snares, claps, hi-hats, things of that nature, even some of the high-end lead instrument sounds. So let's solo this band, just hear what frequencies we're dealing with.
I've been in and out. I'm just being very honest. Got it? Man, I don't gotta lean forward. I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle. I don't gotta mismatch.
Definitely hearing a lot of that vocal, and this is definitely going to be the area where there's a lot of the vocal intelligibility. So we want to be careful here. We don't want to overdo this. We don't want to kill the vocal because this is really where us humans are able to really understand what's being said. So if you suffocate this, it could lead to some problems in terms of just understanding what the vocalist is saying. However, we do want to make this more consistent. And of course, by making it more consistent with this band and adding some makeup gain, that actually might do the opposite. It might actually improve intelligibility and make it easier to hear because it's more consistent sounding. Let's unbypass this band. Let's play this and bring the threshold down and set this up to get about 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction.
I've been in in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect. Trying to tell me who I am, what a dialect. If you're gonna get me upset, let's end this now, let me jet, bet.
Now, this is an extremely loud band, dynamic, right? A lot of highs and lows, a lot of big peaks and quiet peaks because it's just kind of changing with the performance. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to speed up the attack here a little bit so I can get a little bit of a better reaction. Because you can see I'm still roughly in line with the other thresholds. Not that they really matter in this scenario, but you can see that I'm already pushing it. I'm still not getting as much of a reaction as some of these other ones. But if I speed up the attack, what's going to happen is I'll be able to get that reaction. I'll be able to get that gain reduction in this scenario to just smooth everything over. And then I might need to readdress my threshold, but let's kind of do this first.
I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect. Trying to tell me who I am, what a dialect. If you're gonna get me upset, let's end this now, let me jet, bet.
So I've also slowed down my release a little bit, but sped up the attack. So now we're getting a little bit more of that gain reduction action that I was looking for. So now let's do that same exact trick. I think it's working, so why not keep it going? I'm going to solo the band. I'll bypass it for now. Let's see where the volume of this band is before.
I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that?
Okay, so minus 8.9 at the very end, it just kind of went to that. So obviously peaked out at the end. Now let's unbypass it and see how close we are to this number with this compressor.
I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that?
So we're actually not too far away. It's only about 0.4 dB away. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add 0.4 dB. Let's double check, make sure that we've matched it.
I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that?
Okay, so it seems like it's matched, right? So now I'm going to unsolo that, and we're going to go to our final band here. However, I am going to add a little bonus section here for these floating bands, and we'll talk about them in a moment. But let's look at this very, very top end band. Let's hear what we're going to affect here. This is probably going to be like hi-hats and extreme high-end air on the vocal, for example. Mostly top end air. Still important to get that shininess, but we still want to maybe reduce this a little bit, make it consistent. So now I'm going to just set my threshold, bring it down, and see what kind of gain reaction we can get here. Now, this is obviously a slightly quieter band, so I'm going to ease up on my attack. I'm going to actually quicken the attack, so that way this can actually get a slightly more aggressive reaction, so to speak, but also just control this section. Okay, here we go. So this seems to be pretty good, okay, where I have it set here. I've quickened the attack. I've slowed down the release ever so slightly as well, getting a good amount of gain reduction here. So as always, let's do our gain matching trick here. I'll bypass the band. Let's see where it's at. So minus 14.2, let's put it in, see where we're at. So we're only about 0.3 dB away, looks like. So I'm going to add 0.3, and now that should be roughly matched. If I unsolo it, we have all of our bands in. But now let's talk about using these floating bands. There's 2 of them, and we're probably only going to use 1 in this case, so I guess I cheated. I said we're going to have only 4 bands in this video, but for those who stuck around, here's a bonus round of 5. And the way that you want to use these bands is you want to use it to do some de-essing. So on a master, it's very common that there's some metallic percussion like cymbals and hi-hats and things like that that can really build up and create a lot of of sibilance. And similarly, anyone who mixes vocals know, vocals can also have a lot of sibilance, a lot of harshness. So these two floating bands, which you see on the right and left side of the C6 here, is basically used to control those areas. You can kind of center around a frequency, and then you could treat them. And of course, you can see that it's a pretty narrow cue. It's only going to affect that area, but I think it might be a good idea to use one just to treat any potential sibilance or harshness that might be taking place on the record. So that being said, let's actually use this one on the left here. I'm going to solo it, and let's actually see. You can see the settings are all set up as normal. Let's see roughly what we're affecting right now, and the goal is I'm going to sweep around if this is not the right selection and find where that sibilance, that harshness, those S's, T's, CH's, and anything like that really lives on the frequency spectrum. Let's do it. So sorry's actually seems to be a little bit higher, okay? Usually it's around 5K, right, as a general rule. But of course, it's going to be unique for each vocalist because everyone's voice is different. And I could hear a little bit more of that, you know, sibilance action and stuff happening in that 6,000 to 7,000 window. I'm going to maybe keep it around here, and you can see it as a cue, so I can actually adjust how wide the cue is, how much frequency we're affecting. Now, I am going to want to keep this a little bit more narrow. I don't want this to be a super noticeable thing. I just want to help treat those additional harsh pockets that might pop up. So I'm going to play this now and bring the threshold down and try to treat those S's. Here we go. Okay, so I've got a little bit more of an aggressive gain reduction happening here, right? It's almost hitting that full maximum of -3, but that's okay because this is usually just a frequency we don't want at all. And I say I don't want it at all, I just really don't want it to have a significant presence in the track. I'm not even going to add any makeup gain. I don't want to add anything back to it. I just want to simply treat this area when it's a problem. So now if I unsolo this and I put this whole thing in context, let's bypass this multi-band compressor and put it in and just see the difference between what we started with and where we ended up so far.
I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect. Trying to tell me who I am, what a dialect. If you're gonna get me upset, let's end this now, let me jet back. I've been in and out, I'm just being very honest, got it? Man, I don't gotta lean for it, I can sit back. Stick it like a puzzle, I don't gotta mismatch. Not a fan of love hard being booed up when your life's in a rut, you get that? I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're incorrect. Trying to tell me who I am, what a dialect. If you're gonna get me upset, let's end this now, let me jet back.
A somewhat of a subtle difference, but everything just feels tighter. And of course, maybe you're thinking like, oh, it's not a huge difference. Well, the thing is, we're not really trying to jack up the volume here. We're not trying to make things go crazy here. All we're trying to do is tighten and glue things together. And if you're looking for volume, all you're going to do is later on in your mastering chain, you're going to add some limiting and some additional processing that will ultimately increase the volume and give you that volume that you're after. We're not really trying to do that in this step here. We're just really trying to tighten everything and get it a little bit more focused, and I definitely think that we're getting this. Now, if you want to see another video where I talk about my mastering chain step by step from start to finish on a recent song, click the video that you're going to see on screen. I appreciate you guys for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
5